Essentially, what we're looking at is the Grecian schools, the great schools of Plato and Aristotle would have applied the two rationales, the Trivium and the Quadrivium. Now, the Quadrivium, while a subject of some interest, really doesn't interest me greatly because those subjects are largely the sciences that we're all aware of, but and that we generally are taught in school. But unfortunately, without being taught the Trivium, we are unable to ever move on beyond an understanding of that which we are given, the received wisdom that we are educated in. And with the lack of the Trivium, without the understanding of how to learn, we are, as children, when we become adults, when we are presented with new information. So we have to be taught how to think, perhaps specifically learn how to think, I suppose. And the way to learn how to think most easily is through the Trivium, and possibly with some memory exercises utilising something called the Sefrot, the Kabbalistic map of the chakras. So I'll cover both of those topics, hopefully.
Alright.
Oh, shut up. Right. Okay, well, first of all, the Trivium. The Trivium is the three-sided equilateral triangle with grammar at the top, logic down one side, rhetoric at the other side. So we have a concept of grammar being the description of things, and in the Grecian school, the description of something would be reducing it to its minimum working components. So the description of a, let's say, a dice, we could say a piece of wood numbered 1 to 6. That would be a description of a dice, but it would be a less than complete description of the dice. So we've gone a few steps too far with our reduction of a concept of a dice with that use of grammar. So then we extend our description to a cube of wood with numbers from 1 to 6 marked on the faces. This is a much better description of a dice, but unfortunately if you take something like that into any gambling casino anywhere on the planet, they'll string you from the nearest yardarm. This is because a dice is actually laid out in a specific numerological order, with the 1 on the opposite face to the 6, the 5 on the opposite face to the 2, etc., etc. We could also go a little further into the description of the mechanics of the dice, because in fact when you look at a dice, it's not in fact a cube, it's a cuboid with beveled edges. This is to enable the dice obviously to tumble more freely when you're using them to play dice-based games. It also evens up the reliability of them falling randomly on each face. So we now have our grammatical description of a dice, which is a cube of wood with its faces, with its corners radiused, with the numbers from 1 to 6 marked on each face, with each pair of opposing faces adding up to 7. If we, well, in fact, there's one more term in that, of course, because we're lacking the scalar dimension. Unfortunately, if you were to hand that description to any good engineer, you may well end up with an aircraft hangar with numbers carefully marked on each side, made out of a cube of wood. Obviously not much good for your average human to play a game of Yahtzee with. So of course we have to include the scalar description in there, and of course in this case it would be a cube of wood with the corners radiused with numbers ranging from 1 to 6 on its faces, with the numbers of opposing faces adding up to 7, at a scale which fits the human hand comfortably. Okay, we now have a full and complete description of a dice. It would not be possible to reduce any of those terms and still accurately describe a playing dice. Okay, so by the use of grammar, with the codifying nature that the use of grammar allows us through language I mean, many terms that we use in English are very ambiguous. Many terms have double meanings, multiple meanings, many layered meanings. Even the very word grammar, when you look into the etymology of it, isn't necessarily the simple word that we would consider to use in common English. I think it's the art of words is the actual Greek base for the word grammar. So I suppose we're describing here the concept of the ability with the art of words to be able to accurately describe any of the observed reality. Now, if we take our grammatical description of observed reality and we think about it, we apply logic, we compare it to other things that we've thought about, we consider it hopefully from all sides. Hopefully we try and consider it neutrally, because many observations are very emotionally charged and become very coloured by opinion and belief. Now, once we have applied logic to our observed grammar, we are then able to release this newfound wonderment at the world through rhetoric, which is our ability to then reiterate that which we have learnt and considered, so that our fellow man can also benefit from our discoveries. And this is how the human race has moved forward. It's very much a verbal tradition in many senses. So I would like to firstly encourage everybody that's able to think about this to start to think about thinking as well, because we all tend to live in an automatic state where thinking is taken for granted, when in fact the thinking that we take for granted is the thoughts of the ego mind, of the mind that is immersed in the daily mundanery. And as a result, our thinking patterns tend to be very conscribed by the ticking of the clock and the date on the calendar, when in fact when we realise that we're able to think about thinking, we instantly become aware of an entire new chamber of our mind, which is in fact open to thought outside of times and outside of the constraints of the bills and the rent and the washing up. And more precisely, what we actually enter into, our ego is considered to largely exist in our frontal cortex. Most of the actions of the ego can be detected on a CAT scan in the frontal part of the brain. If we then look at most of the subconscious or overconscious thought patterns, they're shown in the two hemispheres, in the lateral part of the brain and the mid part of the brain. Well, if we consider this on perhaps a computer model, then what we're actually talking about here is the ability to parallel process. This is the realm of supercomputers, and if we go beyond the materialistic mechanistic model of the synapse as being some kind of a hardwired wiring system, and look at it more on the level of it being a non-binary system, that each synaptic input has a multiple outputs, and therefore effectively we are talking a non-binary, non-linear computer gate, which is effectively similar to what we're trying to achieve in the computer realm at the moment with quantum computing. So if we enter into the state of thinking about thinking, we suddenly enter a functional part of the brain which is both parallel and supercomputing, and that the very simple act of simply observing our thoughts as they pass through our our foremind, we are able to immediately step into the overmind and access these vastly superior computational abilities. And when we then start to apply logical constructs like the Trivium to the thoughts that we are having, it suddenly enables one to free the mind and to clear one's thoughts. And certainly to think, I've found myself being able to recently consider subjects that before were so complex and so varied and so contrived with all of the various information and disinformation, but that by stepping back from the emotional mind, from the ego mind, from the foremind, and into the overmind, and just allowing the data points to be assembled and acted upon via the rational functions of grammar, logic and rhetoric, and then reapplying. This is the other thing, the real secret of the Trivium is to then take the terms and the ideas that are presented through rhetoric and apply them back into the start of the system again. So we then apply that rhetoric to the action of grammar and refine the terms and refine the concepts and then apply logic and then reiterate them. So this isn't a simple once run done program, and as such you can find yourself gradually refining topics and ideas that would normally addle your brain with their level and complexity.